Now that we have transformed our data and we run it in our production environment after deployment, it's time to visualize it. When we're working locally in our Postgres environment, we can't use a tool like Data Studio. And for that reason, we're going to be using Metabase as an alternative. Metabase has a cloud environment solution as well, but they have an open source edition that's free to use and that we can install locally. They already, from your page, if you go to get started, they're going to try to first welcome you to the cloud solution that they provide. But if you go here to the open source, then you'll be able to find the Docker image. You can get it directly from Docker Hub and then run it in your port 3000. You have to make sure that your Postgres environment is also available. Because we're going to be connecting to the database. Otherwise, you could also use the jar file locally to run Metabase. And this other set, it's going to start working in our local host in this port 3000. At the beginning, it's going to ask a few things for the settings, like a user and the connection to the database. And which database do you want to use exactly? I put a name to it. And because of that, now I have already all of these schemas that I have available. Something really nice about Metabase is that, let's say I chose here my local development, and I can go to one table and I can see already several tiles about that table that are generated automatically. Within the styles, I can also apply filters. So something like a Voro, for example, it's going to identify some of them, but I could also go and update the styles to zoom into several fields that I would like to see, and it also even generates some related questions that we would like to answer with the data, for example. And here we're going to see a distribution for all of the fields, most of our columns. We can click show more about this, and they're also going to show us some time series, some other distributions. And this is very nice for us to already be able to explore the data, especially when it's new and we may not know very well what kind of graph we would like to do. In here, all of the graphs, they're also interactive, so you can go in the graph and then you could check the numbers. You can also, if you click here, for example, you can zoom in into this specific column, or you can use them as filters. So if I go here, I could go directly to the graph, for example. I could compare them with the others. I could filter by this value and make sure that I only have a count that is equal to that. And let's now go back to the X-ray dashboard. And you could save this dashboard as well if you wanted to, that it was generated for us. We're now going to create some questions. All of this, there are cool questions here in Metabase. So the tiles, everything that it's here, everything that appears here, these are questions. And we're going to go here and select fact trips. If you go to here already to fact trips, we're going to find two things. One, it would be the tables in a database, and the other one, it would be the questions, which are the tiles for dashboard that I said before. So from here, we're going to be using the table, but from here, another nice thing is that you could go directly to, let's say, we see that the table is in this database and then in this schema. So I could click in the schema and I could see, so I could go also to a database and check my schemas. And I could go here and I could click on any of my tables and do something like the X-ray, and I would come back to this. And I could also do something like this, learn about this table, and I would have something similar to a data dictionary, where I could have, for example, potential useful questions, and I could even go and click, I could directly go and see the raw data as well. I could check the fields. I could see the data type, so like some basic informations, and I could here link questions that I want to do about this table. And once again, here we can go to the X-ray of the table, which is the main dashboard. So let's go back here and let's create a question. We're going to be using this one. And the questions, they mainly have three components. One is the data. And here we could join with other data. We could filter the columns that we want to. Maybe we don't want all of the tables in Factory. We only want to use a few. We could also create our own custom columns. And the custom columns, we're mainly going to be able to use math formula. They don't have many formula like we did in Data Studio to truncate the month or the year. And you could create that field. I'm going to remove this one. We can add some filters. So let's think about pickup daytime, for example, that we only want the data for 2019 and 2020. But you could even define already something like pick always the last month or the last week, which is very useful. Let's do that's from the beginning of January 2019 until the end of December 2020. And here we're going to say what is that we want to see. So let's say the count of rows. And again, you can create your own expressions as well. And something that I also like is that all of these are very self-explanatory, not reading that the average, but from here you can see the whole name and the whole explanation of what the metric is about. Let's do the count of rows. And here we're going to select the fields that we want to group that by. So, for example, the pickup location, the pickup data. And from here, we can already see the type of data that we're talking about. And in this case, that it's a daytime, I could select something like the dimension. So this would be something like the equivalent to what we did in Google Studio, that we took the month out of the pickup data and we took the year. So let's say that I'll pick the week here, and I could pick other fields. Something to have in mind is that we can always pick each field only once, which means that I'm not able to do like I did in Google Data Studio, that I pick the week and then I pick also the year. If I go here to daytime, then I would see the drop of daytime, for example. From here, I can already click on preview, and then the preview will show me a table, which would be the result of this data. I could also set some things like a sorting. So if I want to order descending, or if I want to set a row limit. So if I only want to see the first 10 rows or something like that. And another thing that I could also do is add another filter, of course, but then I could also add another summarize. So I want to have the count by daytime, but I also want to have the average, for example. And once we do this, we're going to click visualize. Unfortunately, this with Postgres is taking a lot of time. And for that reason is that I had already created the question before, and this is how it looks like. So if you see here is the same filter that I have defined. Here I have defined a week, and we can see already how it looks like. If we are here, we can go back to the editor. So this part. And if we go here, we could define another filters. So let's say service type, and then I could select, I could apply a filter. And I could go here in visualization, and I could simply change it if I wanted to. So let's say instead of this one, I want to have a bar, and it would change it. Let's go back. Let's use a line. And here in the axis, I could change smaller things, like how do I want to show all of these dates, for example. Do you want to have them shorten? Let's go back. And here under settings, you can define other things. So for example, I want this to be a different color. I want to have it filled here. I want to change the style of the line. I want to make it softer, or I want to make it more square. Do I want to show the dots here? These are small dots, which are quite nice. I can add different do I want to have, for example, the trend line? Let's take that out, it's too much, and done. Okay, and here I also have the option as well to see this as a table. And I can download my data as well, so I can download this. If I wanted to have this as a result, I could save it. And we now can save it. So this question, we can put a name to it. So total trips per week. For example, I could add the description that would go to what we saw, the data dictionary. And I could also set several folders, and I could save them in a folder if I wanted to use it later on. Save this. And here by default already tells me if I want to add it to a dashboard. I'm going to put not now. And we're going to create a dashboard. I had already created all of the questions because these were taking a long time. So I created them. And if we go now to dashboard, we can create a new dashboard. So my dashboard about trips. You can, again, choose if you want to have a folder, if you want to add a description. And here, what we're going to do is just add questions. So once we click in our questions, we can even take the questions, for example, from that we have generated from before. And here, they're going to be loading. We could also add some filters, like we saw, for example, in the dashboards that were generated, that we already had some filters. So we could add something like, for example, a month or a year, or we could also do here the last 7 days, like we said before. And I actually had already created a dashboard here because it was taking too long. And here's how it would look like. You have a grid, and then you can just play around with the things. With the tiles, you can make them bigger, you can make them smaller. And also, let's say here, for example, I have several colors and they don't match very well. So I could go to the tile, and I could go here to visualization options, and I could change something, like I don't like the title, for example, it doesn't match, or I could change the order that I want to see, for example, the columns, and I could change basically how it looks like here. That in this one, it was just a table, so the only thing I can do is basically move things around. But in here, for example, I could say, okay, I want this one to be this size, or I don't want to show the lesson, or I don't want to show the percentage, and then it would change. Again, I would be able to change the title, and let's say this is done. And once our dashboard is done, so let's say that this goes with what we want to show, then we can save it. And from here, we have a few other options. If once it's saved, see, I can't move things around. And now that I click, I can see things like we saw in the main dashboard, in the original dashboard at the very beginning. So I could use the filterings, for example, or I could hover over the bars and then see the exact numbers. Something that when I'm editing, I'm not able to do, because every time when I click, then it would mean that it would have to edit the tile. But if we save it, then now it's interactive. So now it allows us to hover and see the data. Other things that can be done is, of course, sharing. So I could share this, and we saw again also that we have these collections, these folders, where we could save them. And this is what we would normally share with our stakeholders. So we would have maybe a share folder where we put our dashboards or questions. But I could also would like to maybe have people directly subscribe to my dashboard, then I could also do that. And I could set an auto refresh. So let's say this data is coming every 10 minutes. I'm having new trip data. And in this case, I want this dashboard to refresh. If someone is using this, then I want this to refresh every 10 minutes to make sure that I'm always seeing at the last numbers. And once we have the dashboard saved already, we can also see it, set it up to see it in our main window, and we could do things like duplicate it or archive it as well if we don't want to use it anymore. And something that I missed to say is that once you're editing the dashboard, let's say you are in one of this and you want to see, in this case, this is the distribution between the service type, right? So this was the yellow and this was the green. And let's say I want someone, the person that is looking at the dashboard, once they click in this graph, to go to a second dashboard where I have way more tiles and questions around this distribution between the yellow and trip data. And I could do that by selecting the click behavior. And here I could put go to a custom destination, and I could send them somewhere that it's relevant to that question that I'm showing here. And this is all.